The wind came first as a whisper, a cold lie snaking through the pines that bordered the small, hard-scrabble town of Providence Creek. By midday, it was a scream. Snow, fine and sharp as ground bone, flew not down, but sideways, erasing the world in a churning vortex of white. It was on this day, the day the sky fell, that the town decided it had no more room for Abigail. She stood on the porch of the small cabin her husband had built, a place that held the last echoes of his voice, the faint scent of his pipe tobacco still clinging to the timbers. In her hand, she held a small satchel with what little she could carry. Beside her, pressed against her leg, a magnificent German shepherd named Ghost stood silent and still, his intelligent amber eyes fixed on the men before them. His body was a coiled spring of tension, a low growl, a constant vibration in his chest, held back only by the gentle pressure of Abigail's hand on his neck. Marcus Thorne, the town's self-appointed leader and owner of the mercantile, stood with his arms crossed, his face a mask of grim righteousness. The cold had already reddened his cheeks, but his eyes were colder still. "It's a matter of resources, Abigail," he said, his voice struggling to carry over the shriek of the wind. "We've a hard winter ahead. Everyone must contribute. You've done nothing but wander in the woods, wasting your days on that tree. We can't carry you." Abigail said nothing. Her gaze was steady, her face pale but composed. She had known this was coming. The whispers had followed her for months, sticking to her like burrs. The strange widow. The silent woman who communed with a dead oak. She looked past Thorne, at the other faces huddled behind him, faces she had known for years. Some looked away, ashamed. Others mirrored Thorne's hard resolve. They were afraid, and their fear had curdled into cruelty. A woman, Mrs. Gable, clutching her shawl tight, spoke up. "It ain't right, Marcus." "Not in this," Thorne shot her a silencing glare. "It's done." The town council voted. He gestured vaguely toward the swirling chaos beyond the town's edge. "The road south is that way. May God have mercy on your soul." But Abigail didn't look south. As Thorne and his committee of nervous townsfolk retreated, pulling their coats tight against the biting wind, she turned her back on the road. Her gaze fell upon the dark line of the ancient forest, a place the townsfolk feared, a place they said was haunted by things best left undisturbed. With a soft word to Ghost, she stepped off the porch, the snow immediately swallowing her worn boots. She did not look back at the town that had cast her out. She walked with a steady, unhurried pace, not like someone fleeing, but like someone with a destination. Ghost stayed at her side, a dark, powerful shadow against the blinding white, his presence a silent promise of loyalty in a world that had shown her none. The last thing the people of Providence Creek saw was the small, determined figure of the widow and her dog disappearing into the teeth of the blizzard, swallowed by the very wilderness they had accused her of loving more than them. The journey was a descent into a frozen hell. Each breath was a shard of ice in Abigail's lungs. The wind tore at her cloak, a physical force that sought to rip her from the earth and cast her into the white oblivion. But she leaned into it, her body a testament to a quiet, unyielding strength the townsfolk had never bothered to see. Ghost moved ahead, then circled back, his powerful body breaking a path for her through the rapidly deepening drifts. He was more than a dog, he was an extension of her will, a partner in this desperate pilgrimage. The world was reduced to the space immediately around them, the howling fury of the storm, the burn of the cold on her exposed skin, and the reassuring warmth of the animal at her side. She navigated not by sight, for there was nothing to see but a maelstrom of white, but by an internal map, a memory of every stone and fallen log etched into her mind from countless walks. For hours they pushed onward, a solitary island of life in a world determined to extinguish it. Finally, through the deafening roar, she felt a change in the terrain. The ground sloped upwards. The trees grew thicker, their ancient trunks acting as a partial break against the wind's assault. And then she saw it. Looming out of the blizzard like the shoulder of a god, was the guardian oak. It was a tree of impossible size, a relic from a time before axes and men. Its trunk was wider than a cabin, its bark a gnarled and deeply fissured landscape of its own. Its upper branches were lost in the swirling snow, but its base was a fortress of living wood. On the leeward side, sheltered from the worst of the wind, was a dark opening, a hollow large enough for a man to walk into without stooping. This was the place the town had called her folly. This was the obsession that had cost her everything. Ghost pushed his head into the opening, then looked back at her, his tail giving a single, confident thump against his side. Abigail followed him, ducking under the lip of weathered wood and stepping out of the storm. The sudden silence was as shocking as the wind had been. The roar of the blizzard was instantly muffled, reduced to a distant, frustrated moan. Inside, the air was still and cold, but it was a dead cold, not the living, tearing cold of the outside. The hollow was immense, a natural cavern within the heart of the tree. The floor was packed earth, swept clean. In the center was a carefully constructed ring of stones. Against one wall, neatly stacked, was a small mountain of dry, seasoned firewood. This was no mere hole in a tree. It was a shelter. A home. A sanctuary she had built with her own hands, piece by piece, while the world mocked her. The mockery had begun subtly, just after her husband, Thomas, had passed. It started as pitying glances, the kind reserved for a woman unmoored by grief. But Abigail's grief was a quiet, private thing. She didn't weep in public or seek the smothering comfort of the town's busybodies. Instead, she began to walk. Every morning, with Ghost at her side, she would head into the old woods, carrying tools, a small shovel, a hand axe, leather bags. She would return at dusk, weary and smudged with dirt, but with a strange peace in her eyes. The town, a place that thrived on shared, observable emotion, did not understand her solitary ritual. Mrs. Gable, from behind the counter of the mercantile, became the primary narrator of Abigail's supposed descent into madness. Saw her again this morning, she'd announce to anyone who would listen. Hauling rocks to that old dead tree. Talking to it, I reckon. Poor thing, her mind snapped when Thomas went. The men in the saloon found it darkly amusing. Building a home for squirrels, one would joke. Nah, another would guffaw. She's waiting for him to come back as a woodpecker. Marcus Thorne, a man who measured worth in coin and commerce, found her behavior deeply unsettling. It was unproductive. It was strange. He saw her once, dragging a heavy bundle of dried grasses and reeds into the forest. Abigail, he had called out, his voice thick with condescension. A woman alone shouldn't be wandering out here. It isn't proper. You should be in town, perhaps helping at the church. She had simply looked at him, her gaze clear and unwavering, and said nothing before continuing on her way. Her silence was their canvas, and on it, they painted a portrait of a broken, witless widow. They called the ancient tree the widow's folly, a monument to her grief-addled mind. They never asked why she did it. They never considered that her quiet, relentless work was not an act of madness, but an act of profound purpose. They did not know that every stone she placed, every branch she cut, was guided by a memory, a promise whispered to her by the man she loved on his deathbed. He had been a trapper, a man who read the land and the sky, and he had seen the signs of a changing climate, of winters growing longer and harder. His last gift to her was not a fortune, but a warning, and a plan for survival. But the town saw only the strangeness, and in their small world, what was strange was dangerous and had to be cast out. Back in the present, the muted howl of the storm outside was a lullaby of survival. Inside the heart of the guardian oak, Abigail moved with practiced efficiency. With flint and steel, she coaxed a small flame to life in the stone fire pit. The wood, seasoned for months, caught quickly, and soon a steady, smokeless fire pushed a circle of warmth and flickering orange light into the cavernous dark. A clever, narrow channel she had carved near the top of the hollow drew the thin ribbon of smoke upwards and out, a secret chimney hidden amongst the gnarled bark. The town had seen madness, but here was the evidence of a meticulous, intelligent plan. She unrolled 2 thick wool blankets onto a bed of woven rush mats and dried pine needles, a space insulated from the cold earth. From a recess in the wooden wall, she retrieved sealed clay pots. One held dried venison and berries. Another held parched corn and beans. A third was full of clean water she had hauled, trip by trip, from a hidden spring. This wasn't just a shelter, it was a larder, a fortress against the very world that had abandoned her. Ghost lay by the fire, his massive head on his paws, watching her every move. He was not just a companion, he was a partner in this endeavor. He had stood guard for endless hours while she worked, his low growls warning away curious wolves or a wandering bear. He had helped her drag heavier branches, his powerful jaws gripping the wood. Now, in their sanctuary, he was the silent keeper of their shared peace. Abigail sat by the fire, ladling warm water into a small wooden bowl and adding a handful of dried herbs. The simple act was a ritual of defiance. Out there, the world was a maelstrom of chaos and death. In here, there was order, warmth, and life. She ran her hand down Ghost's powerful back, feeling the reassuring rhythm of his breathing. The people of Providence Creek thought her weak, a burden to be discarded. They had no idea of the strength it took to build this, to prepare in silence while enduring their scorn. They had mistaken quietness for frailty, and solitude for insanity. As the blizzard raged, Abigail and her dog sat in the warm, gentle glow of their fire, a pocket of impossible safety carved from the heart of a tree, waiting for the world to freeze. The storm, however, was not content to simply freeze the world. It intended to break it. What had begun as a severe blizzard was transforming into something monstrous, a weather event that would be spoken of in hushed tones for generations. The wind, no longer just a howl, developed a deep, guttural roar, the sound of a giant beast trying to claw its way through the mountains. Snow fell with an impossible density, piling up not in drifts, but in solid walls of white. In Providence Creek, the town's smug security began to splinter. The first sign of their folly was the sound, a high-pitched groaning of stressed timbers coming from every structure. These were cabins built quickly, with green wood, designed for mild winters, not for the apocalypse descending upon them. The weight of the snow was immense, a crushing burden that their simple architecture was never meant to bear. Marcus Thorne, in his relatively large home attached to the mercantile, felt a tremor run through the floorboards. A fine dusting of snow began to fall from the ceiling joists. His confidence, as solid as he believed his walls to be, began to crack. He thought of Abigail, out in the storm, and felt a flicker of something, not guilt, but a grim, self-serving satisfaction that he had been right to preserve his resources. That flicker was extinguished when a loud crack, like a gunshot, echoed from his roof. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced his arrogance. Across the town, the same story was unfolding. Families huddled together, listening to the sound of their homes dying around them. The saloon, the symbol of their loud community, was the first to suffer a major blow. A section of its long, flat roof, unable to shed the immense weight, buckled and collapsed, showering the empty interior with snow and splintered wood. They had mocked Abigail's solitary obsession with one ancient, sturdy tree, while they had put their faith in a collection of weak, vulnerable boxes. They had cast out the one person who understood the true nature of the wilderness that surrounded them, the one person who knew that nature does not care for votes or town councils. It cares only for preparation. The people of Providence Creek were learning a brutal lesson: their community, their rules, their shared scorn, it was all as flimsy as the walls that were now threatening to collapse and bury them alive. The wilderness was reminding them who was truly in charge. The breaking point came with a sound that was not wind or cracking wood, but a deep, catastrophic roar followed by the splintering crash of a giant falling. The entire roof of the mercantile, the town's heart and its primary store of food, blankets, and supplies, gave way. A mountain of snow and timber collapsed into the building, burying everything. Panic, which had been a quiet guest in every home, now kicked down the doors and took control. Shouts of terror were swallowed by the wind. People spilled out of their creaking cabins, only to be met with a chest-high wall of snow and blinding whiteout conditions. They were trapped, their homes becoming tombs and the outside world an impassable, frozen sea. The Millers tried to dig out their front door, only to have the snow slide down and bury it again, their young son crying in terror inside. Old Mr. Abernathy, who lived alone, was completely snowed in, his chimney blocked, the smoke from his fireplace slowly filling his tiny cabin. The town doctor, whose cabin was nearest the woods, was utterly unreachable, his home having vanished completely beneath a monolithic drift. They were isolated, terrified, and their resources were gone, buried under tons of snow and wreckage. the social order that Marcus Thorne had so proudly defended evaporated in an instant. There was no leader, no council, no resources to manage. There was only the cold, the snow, and the dawning, horrific realization of their complete and utter failure. It was Samuel, the blacksmith, a man of few words and powerful hands, who first gave voice to the thought brewing in their panicked minds. Huddled with a few others in the relative safety of his forge, the only building with a stone roof, he looked out at the white chaos. "We called it the widow's folly," he said, his voice a low rumble. "She spent all summer and fall out there. Hauling supplies. Digging. She wasn't playing. She was building." The other men looked at him, their faces pale with cold and fear. The image of Abigail walking calmly into the storm was no longer a picture of a madwoman heading to her doom. It was the image of a prophet leaving a city of fools. Marcus Thorne, who had stumbled into the forge seeking shelter, heard him. The blacksmith's words hit him harder than the cold. She knew. That quiet, strange woman had known this was coming, and they had driven her out. Their only hope for survival was the very person they had condemned to die. The decision was born of pure desperation. "We have to find her," Samuel stated, his voice leaving no room for argument. "She's the only one who might have a real shelter. The only one with food." Thorne, his face ashen, could only nod in agreement. His authority was gone, replaced by a raw, primal fear. A small, desperate party was formed: Thorne, whose knowledge of the town's business was now useless, Samuel, whose physical strength was their best asset, and a young man named Daniel, wiry and fast, who knew the woods better than most. Their attempt to leave the town was a pathetic, brutal struggle. They had no snowshoes, only thick wool blankets wrapped around their legs, which quickly became waterlogged and heavy. The wind was a physical barrier, knocking them off their feet. They couldn't see more than a few feet in front of them, and the cold was a living thing, draining their strength with every step. For every 10 feet they gained, the blizzard seemed to push them back 5. This was the same path Abigail had walked hours before, but where she had moved with purpose, they floundered in chaos. Thorne, accustomed to a life of soft hands and ledgers, was the first to falter. He collapsed into a drift, the will to go on draining out of him. "We can't," he gasped, his words turning to frost in the air. "It's impossible." Samuel hauled him to his feet, his face grim. "She did it. With a dog. We go on, or we die here." As they pushed forward, driven by the slimmest margin of hope and the certainty of death behind them. They were lost, disoriented, shouting to each other to stay together, their voices snatched away by the wind. Just as despair began to settle in for good, a new sound cut through the storm. It was not the wind. It was a bark. Deep, powerful, and controlled. It came again, closer this time. Daniel stopped, wiping ice from his eyelashes. "A dog," he stammered. "Out here." Through the swirling snow, a shape emerged. It was dark and powerful, moving with an ease that defied the conditions. It was Ghost. He stopped a short distance away, watching them with his intelligent, assessing eyes. He let out another sharp bark, then turned and looked back into the white chaos from which he had come. He was not threatening them. He was guiding them. Abigail had sent him. She had known they would come. Following the dog was an act of surreal faith. Ghost moved through the blizzard with an almost supernatural confidence, weaving around impassable drifts and through copses of trees that provided momentary relief from the wind. He would run ahead, then wait for the 3 struggling men to catch up, his silhouette a beacon in the storm. He led them up the same gentle slope Abigail had climbed, into the ancient part of the forest where the trees grew like titans. The men, exhausted and frost-bitten, stumbled after him, their minds reeling from the impossibility of it all. They were being rescued by the dog of the woman they had cast out. At last, Ghost stopped before a wall of wood that seemed to rise forever into the sky. It was the guardian oak. The sheer scale of it was humbling, a living monument that made their entire town seem insignificant. The dog disappeared into a dark opening at its base. Hesitantly, the men followed, crawling out of the screaming blizzard and into an almost sacred silence. The warmth hit them first. Not the scorching heat of a blacksmith's forge, but a gentle, radiant warmth. Then their eyes adjusted to the flickering firelight. They saw Abigail. She was not the wild, crazed woman of their gossip, but a figure of profound calm and control. She was kneeling by the fire, stirring a pot that sent a curl of fragrant steam into the air. She looked up as they entered, her expression not one of triumph or anger, but of simple, solemn acknowledgement. "You're hurt," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Come to the fire. Take off your wet things." There was no "I told you so," no recrimination. Only an immediate, practical compassion that was more shaming than any accusation could have been. As she tended to their frost-bitten hands and faces with a gentle salve of herbs, Thorne's eyes fell upon a small, leather-bound journal resting on a stone ledge. Abigail saw him looking. She picked it up and held it out. "My husband's," she explained softly. "Thomas. He was caught in the great blizzard of '48. He survived for a week in a hollow log. He knew another one, a worse one, was coming someday. He spent his last year writing this for me." A guide. Thorne took the book with trembling hands. He opened it to a random page. The handwriting was neat, the words simple and direct, illustrated with careful drawings. It detailed how to find the right tree, how to vent a fire, what foods to store, how to read the signs in the wind and the behavior of animals. It was a manual for survival. A testament of love. Her folly was her husband's final, desperate act to save her. The storm raged for 2 more days. For those 2 days, the heart of the guardian oak became an ark for the remnants of Providence Creek. Abigail and Ghost made 2 more journeys out, guided by an instinct that seemed to defy the blizzard, and returned with more survivors, the Miller family, their young son shivering but alive, and a handful of others who had been huddled in the blacksmith's forge. Inside the hollow, a new kind of community was forged in the firelight. The old hierarchies were gone. Marcus Thorne, the leader of the town, was now just a man grateful for a bowl of warm broth. Mrs. Gable, when she was brought in, could not even meet Abigail's eyes, her face a portrait of profound shame. She finally broke the silence, her voice cracking. "Abigail, we were fools. We were cruel. Can you ever forgive us?" Abigail simply placed a warm blanket over the woman's shoulders. "There is nothing to forgive," she said. "We survived. That is all that matters now." Her grace was a quiet, powerful force that reshaped the soul of the town. She was no longer the strange widow. She was their savior. She moved among them with a quiet authority, rationing the food, tending to the sick, and offering a calm presence that quelled their fear. She shared stories from her husband's journal, teaching them the wisdom they had once scorned. They listened, not just with their ears, but with their hearts, finally understanding that the knowledge she possessed was more valuable than all the goods in Thorne's ruined mercantile. When the wind finally died and a pale, watery sun broke through the clouds, it was Abigail who led them out of the shelter. They emerged into a world transformed, a silent landscape of immense, sculptural snowdrifts. Their town was shattered, a collection of broken sticks buried in white. But they were alive. And as they stood there, blinking in the bright, cold light, they did not look to Marcus Thorne for guidance. They all looked to Abigail. Her redemption was complete, not through argument or accusation, but through the simple, undeniable truth of the warmth she had given them when they had offered her only the cold. She had saved the people who had tried to destroy her. In the weeks and months that followed, Providence Creek was reborn. The work of rebuilding was slow and arduous, but it was different this time. It was guided by a new wisdom, a new humility. Abigail, who had once been an outcast, became the quiet center of the town's universe. She never raised her voice, never claimed any title, but her influence was everywhere. When they rebuilt the houses, they did so with the techniques described in Thomas's journal, with angled roofs to shed snow and foundations dug deep against the frost. Samuel the blacksmith forged new tools, but it was Abigail who showed them how to select the strongest timber, how to read the grain of the wood. At her suggestion, their first communal project was not a new church or saloon, but a central storehouse, dug into the side of a hill, insulated with earth and stone, designed to keep food safe through any winter. The guardian oak was no longer the widow's folly. The townspeople now spoke of it with a kind of reverence. It was a landmark, a symbol of foresight and the enduring power of quiet preparation. Children would sometimes leave small offerings at its base, a pretty stone, a wildflower, a tribute to the place that had saved their families. Abigail remained a quiet person. She still took her daily walks in the woods with Ghost. But now, when she walked through the town, people didn't whisper or look away. They nodded with deep, genuine respect. Marcus Thorne, a humbled man, offered her ownership of the new mercantile, which she politely refused. Instead, she asked only for a small plot of land to grow the herbs and vegetables her husband had taught her to cultivate. She taught the other women how to preserve food, how to make salves and remedies from the forest. She shared her knowledge freely, binding the community together with threads of practical wisdom. Her silence was no longer seen as a sign of madness or grief, but as a wellspring of strength. They had finally learned to listen not to the loudest voice in the room, but to the quietest, for it was the one that spoke the truth. The story of that winter became a founding legend for the town, a moral lesson passed down to every new generation, that what seems strange today may be the wisdom that saves you tomorrow, and that true strength is not found in judgment and scorn, but in the quiet, patient work of building a shelter before the storm arrives.